So for this lecture, we are going to talk about foreign exchange rate exposure and management. So some parts of this lecture has already been covered in the previous week when we talk about the forward exchange rate market. Okay. So with the outline of this topic, we are going to talk about three types of exposures. We are going to talk about transaction exposure. And when I say exposure here, we are talking about exchange rate risk, okay? So we're talking about the unexpected movements in exchange rates that might hurt your position, okay? So here we are going to focus on three different types of exposures. So we are going to talk about transaction exposure. So this is what we discussed in week 4, I think, with the forward and options topic. So you can use this as a part of your revision as well for that topic, okay? With the second type of exposure, we are going to talk about economic exposure. And finally, we talk about operating exposure, yeah? So in each of these topics, we are going to talk about how exchange rate risk can affect your different positions, okay? So with transaction exposure, in transaction exposure, we are focusing on the exchange rate risk exposure on one particular transaction, right? So for example, in your assignment, you look at one particular, either like a receipt or a invoice, and you need to focus, you need to discuss the exposure with that particular transaction, okay? So transaction exposure arises from purchasing or selling goods and services overseas. And so your bill is invoiced in the foreign currency, or your receipt is invoiced in the foreign currency, okay? At the same time, it could also arise from borrowing or lending in the foreign currency. Or you could be a part of the foreign exchange forward contract, so on and so forth, right? So this transaction exposure arises from when you deal with foreign trade partners. And here we are focusing on just one particular transaction, okay? So to define transaction exposure, this is the sensitivity of realized domestic currency values of the firm's cash flow denominated in foreign currencies to unexpected exchange rate changes, okay? So in other words, how much do your domestic proceeds or obligations change when you have a change in the exchange rate, okay? So with transaction exposure management, we'll be focusing on how to manage this exposure by hedging, okay? So with hedging, we talked about financial derivatives before in the previous topic. So transaction exposure could be hedged using either a forward contract. In this lecture, we are going to talk about money market hedge as well. And finally, we talk about options hedge, okay? So with forward hedging, this is what you have already talked about in your assignment. So in this topic, we are going to extend that discussion by including money market and options market, okay? So another way to hedge your foreign exchange rate risk exposure is to use operational techniques. For example, you could choose the invoice currency, right? So for example, if I deal with my trade partner in the US, so instead of giving them a bill in the USD, I can give them a bill in the AUD, right? So in this case, I'm not bearing the exchange rate risk. My trade partner bears the exchange rate risk, okay? Lead and lag strategies, you could also use that. Otherwise, you can use exposure netting. So with exposure netting, this is when, say, for example, if my liabilities, say on the liability side, I've got an obligation denominated in the USD, for example, okay? So in this case, if I want to minimize the exposure on this liability, I could also say I could open a shop in America and I can earn the US income, right? So on the asset side, I'm going to somehow have an exposure in the USD as well, so that these two exposures can net each other out, okay? So I'm going to try to meet a USD obligation using a USD receipt, okay? So for the purpose of this subject, most of the time we'll be focusing on financial hedging. So as we mentioned before, we're going to look at forwards, money market, and options, okay? So with forward market hedge, this is going to be just a revision for you guys because we have talked about this before in the previous topic. So with forward market hedge, depending on what position you have in the underlying asset, so depending on what position you have with the foreign currency, you're going to determine whether you enter into a long or a short position, okay? So here, if I'm going to owe foreign currency, so in the future, if I'm going to have to pay to the foreign partner, then today I'm going to enter into a long forward contract, okay? In contrast, if I think I'm going to receive money in the future in the foreign currency, I'm going to enter into a short forward contract today, okay? So as an example, can you guys help me do this example here? So suppose that Boeing Corporation, so this is an American company. So this company exported a Boeing 747 to British Airways and billed 10 million pounds payable in 1 year, okay? So in this case, because this bill is invoiced in the pounds, so the American company is the one that bears the exchange rate risk, okay? So in this case, the spot exchange rate is $1.5 per pound. The forward exchange rate is 1.46 per pound for a 1 year maturity. Now, in this example, we are going to illustrate how an exchange rate change might affect your receipt in the USD, okay? So in this case, suppose in the future, there could be two possible scenarios. Number one, the exchange rate is going to drop to 1.32, or number two, the exchange rate is going to increase to 1.58, okay? The question asks us to demonstrate the effect of these changes on a hedged versus an unhedged position, okay? So for this exercise, I'm going to need you to have two things. You're going to look at the hedged position and you're going to look at an unhedged position, okay? And for each of these cases, you need to tell me what is the outcome of each of the positions, okay? So suppose I want to hedge this position using the forward contract. Do you think I'm going to enter into a long or a short position? So first question, am I going to be long or am I going to be short in the forward? So I'm going to set up a poll and we can answer from the poll, okay? So I need you to first tell me whether you want to long or short, okay? I've got an answer here for a short. I've got one person long, two people long, and two people short. So this is a receipt for me, yeah, because I'm exporting to my foreign trade partner. So I'm going to receive this much in the future, okay? So in this case, if I have an account receivable, so I'm going to receive, right? I'm going to be receiving the foreign currency. And as a result, I want to be shorting in the forward market, okay? So I'm going to receive money in the future. So in the forward market, I'm going to take the opposite position, which is a short, okay? So here to hedge, I'm going to enter into a short forward position. So if that's the case, how would the future look like to me, right? So with the hedge position, I'm going to enter into a forward contract today that delivers in 1 year. And with the unhedged position, I'm just going to do nothing today. And in the future, I'm going to settle my contract at the future spot rate, okay? I mean, I'm going to convert that 10 million pounds I'm going to get back into the USD at the future spot rate, okay? So I'm going to compare what happens to a hedge and an unhedged position at different points in time, okay? So we mentioned before that as of today, with the hedge position, we want to short a forward contract for 1 year. With the unhedged position, we do nothing today, okay? So in 1 year's time, what happens to the hedge position is, of course, at that time, you're going to receive the pounds from your trade partner, and at which time you're going to convert that pounds into the USD at the market rate at that time, okay? In your unhedged position, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to receive that pounds from your trade partner, and you're going to convert that pounds into the USD at the market rate at that time, okay? Which is S1 or ST if you like. Now, with the forward position, with the hedge position, you're going to have one extra step, which is to settle the forward transaction, the forward contract. So with forward contract, you can do a net settlement, which is what people normally do. In that case, what they do is that they settle the net amount, right? The net settlement amount in the forward contract. So for example, if you have a short forward contract, your payout function is like this. So in the future, if the spot rate is greater than the forward rate, you are going to pay to your trade partner, your counterparty, sorry, in the forward contract. Alternatively, if the spot rate is lower than your forward rate, you're going to receive the money from your counterparty, okay? So in the previous lecture, we just talked about the overall position of a hedge position. We did not break them into two steps like this, okay? In this lecture, we break them into two steps to reflect what happens in reality, okay? So with the unhedged position, there's no forward position to worry about, so you just settle in your spot market, okay? So going back to our example before, so in this case, I'm looking at the case where the future spot rate becomes 1.32, okay? So in this case, in 1 year's time, my spot exchange rate is 1.32, okay? USD per pound. So here I'm listing out all the transactions that are incurred with both a hedge and an unhedged position. So with my unhedged position, at time 0, of course, I didn't do anything. I didn't really enter into any forward contract. At time 1, this is when I received 10 million pounds from my trade partner. And at this time, I'm going to convert the pounds into the USD at the prevailing exchange rate at that time, okay, which is 1.232. So if that's the case, then in the future, for an unhedged position, I'm going to receive 13.2 million USD, right, for this 10 million pounds when I convert this 10 million pounds into the USD. Now, with a hedge position, it's a little bit different, okay? So with the hedge position at time 0, I have entered into a short forward position to buy the pounds at the forward rate of 1.46, and it's going to be settled in 1 year's time, okay? So in the future, when I receive the 10 million pounds from my customer, I'm going to convert that pounds into the USD at the current spot market rate, at the future spot market rate of 1.32. But at the same time, I'm going to settle my forward contract as well, okay? So at time 0, I enter into a forward contract, enter into a short forward contract. So my payoff is F minus ST. I've got a notional amount of 10 million pounds, and therefore under the forward contract, my payoff is 1.4 million USD, okay? So in this case, because the future spot rate is lower than the forward rate, I will get money from the counterparty in the forward contract, okay? So with the hedge position, therefore, my overall position in 1 year's time would be the sum of steps 1 and 2, so that in the future, my total position in USD is 14.6 million, okay? Does that make sense? So this is simply just your notional amount, 10 million pounds, times the forward rate of 1.46, okay? So in this case, when the future spot rate is lower than the forward rate, I actually find that if I hedge before, I will be better off relative to an unhedged position, okay? So if I hedge, I receive 14.6. If I don't hedge, I receive 13.2, okay? So in the next example, in this case, my spot exchange rate moves up to 1.58. So in this case, the exchange rate here, the future exchange rate exceeds my forward rate, okay? So let's look at both positions here. So for my unhedged position, so once again, I'm not doing anything at time 0. I'm going to wait for 1 year, receive the 10 million pounds from my trade partner, and I'm going to convert the pounds into the USD at that time, okay? So here, in the future, I'm going to convert 10 million pounds into the USD at the future spot exchange rate of 1.58, and I'm going to get 15.8 million, okay? With the hedge position, so similar to before, at time 0, we have entered into a short forward position to buy the pounds, to sell the pounds. What did I write here? It should be sell, okay? So here I'm going to sell the pounds at 1.46 to be settled in 1 year. So at time t equals to 1, I'm going to receive the pounds from my customer, and I'm going to convert that into the USD in the spot market. In addition to that, because I have the forward contract that I enter into at time 0, I'm going to have to settle the forward contract now, right? So my payoff function is the same. I have a short forward position. My notional amount is 10 million pounds. And so my payoff function here for the forward contract is minus 1.2 million USD, okay? So my total position for this case, for the hedge case, is the sum of step 1 and 2. So I'm going to take 15.8 minus 1.2, and I'm going to get 14.6 again, okay? So in this case, as before, 14.6 is the same as 10 million pounds times the forward rate, okay? So in the second scenario, where the exchange rate in the future is higher than the forward rate, I find that if I have the forward contract, my payoff is actually lower than the payoff of an unhedged position, okay? But what's important to notice here is that when I hedge, my payoff will always stay the same, which is 14.6, okay? Which is just the 10 million times the forward rate, okay? In contrast, if I don't hedge, then my payoff would be determined by the market rate in the future, okay? So to illustrate on the graph, so if I were to draw the payoff function for an unhedged and a hedged position, With the unhedged position, it looks like this, right? For an account receivable, okay? So here, if I'm going to receive the foreign exchange, the foreign currency in the future, my USD receipts would increase when the exchange rate increase, okay? So this is the USD over the pound exchange rate. In contrast, if I use a forward contract to hedge, if I have entered into a short forward position, then my payoff will always be the same, okay? So my USD proceeds will always stay the same at 14.6 million, okay? So this is the purpose of hedging. You basically have zero exposure to foreign exchange rate movement, okay? Your payoff is always the same, okay? And why is that the case? So on this graph here, I just draw the payoff function of the two positions in more detail. So on your straight line here, this is your unhedged position, okay? This is your account receivable. This is ST, and this is your payoff, okay? Now, when you enter into a short position in the forward, can you see the dashed line here? The downward sloping line here? This is your short forward payoff, okay? So what happens here is when you have two positions that are exactly the opposite to each other, so when you have a long position in your underlying asset, which is your pounds in this case, and then at the same time you combine that with a short forward, then any gain or loss in one position is perfectly offset by any gain or loss in the other position, okay? So that in overall, your position will always stay the same at the forward rate. So 14.6 in this case. Okay, so for example, when the spot exchange rate increases to here, in your underlying asset position, you will make a gain. Okay, so when you convert the pounds back into the dollar, you get a higher proceeds. However, you're going to make a loss in your forward, and this will offset the gain that you make in your underlying asset. Okay, so that overall your position stays here. Similarly, when your spot exchange rate is here, so when it's lower than the forward rate, this is your forward rate, okay? So when it is here, when you convert the pounds into the dollar in your spot exchange market, you will get a lower proceeds, right? So you get less USD for the same amount of pounds. So you make a loss here in the underlying asset. However, in your forward contract, you're going to make a gain that is exactly the same magnitude of the loss in your underlying asset, okay? So as a result, your total position, once again, will stay the same, okay? So this is how, when you combine a short forward with a account receivable, you will have a flat line like this, okay? So it's important to understand that with forward hedging, we are not trying to maximize our USD proceeds. We are just trying to minimize any uncertainty, okay? So if we have a flat line like this is zero uncertainty, okay? You know for sure how much you're going to get in the USD when you convert your pounds in the future, okay? Okay. So if I want to summarize what we talked about before on the table, so here, if you look back at the graph that I showed before in two previous slides, then this column here will reflect your horizontal axis. Okay, so this is your future spot rate movement. Now, This is your unhedged position. So this is your position in the underlying asset. This will be an upward sloping line because this is an account receivable. Okay, so you're going to receive the pounds in the future. Okay, this is the outcome for the forward hedge, and as you can see, they are all the same. So this is the flat line in your previous graph. This is your hedge outcome. This one here is the difference between your forward hedge position and your unhedged position. Okay, so let's go through it. Now, in the first column, this is my exchange rate going from low to high. So when the exchange rate is low, I've got a lower proceed in the spot market, and so on and so forth, right? So with the hedge position, when the exchange rate is low, I'm actually better off if I have a hedge position, because in this case, the loss that I make from the underlying asset is offset by the gain that I have from the forward contract. Okay. In contrast, when the future spot exchange rate is higher than the forward rate, then in this case, I am worse off with the hedge position. Okay. So in this case, everyone in the market gets more USD when they convert the pounds, but I will still get the same thing, which is 14.6. Okay. So in this case, I'm a bit worse off. The important thing here, though, is to understand that for the hedge position, my payoff stays the same, regardless of how the market moves. Whereas for the unhedged position, the future USD proceeds depends on the future spot exchange rate movement. Okay. Okay, so we have just gone through an example where we have an exporter. So in the previous case, we were dealing with account receivable, right? So in the second case, we've got an example for importers. So in this case, we are expecting to pay our trade partner in the future, okay? So in this case, I've got a US company that has business in Italy, and they have to pay their suppliers 10 million euros in 1 year's time, okay? So in this case, I'm going to do the same exact analysis. I'm going to have two positions, one hedge and one unhedged, and I'm going to analyze how these positions are like when the market exchange rate moves in the future, okay? So the current spot exchange rate is 1.1. The forward exchange rate is 1.25. In the future, I can have two different scenarios. The first scenario is when the exchange rate is lower than the forward rate. And the second scenario is when the exchange rate is higher than the forward rate, okay? So similar to before, I want you to think first about, number one, if I want to hedge, am I going to enter into a long or a short forward position? And second, analyze the outcome of the hedge and the unhedged position for each of these scenarios, okay? So question one, if I want to hedge this position, do I want to long or do I want to short, okay? So I've got 4 people, 5 people answering long. I've got 6 now. Okay, so here I've got an account payable. Spot on, guys. Now I've got 9 people answering long and 1 person answering short. Okay, so if you have chosen short, can you explain to me why? Okay. So this is the opposite to the previous example before, okay? So in this case, I'm expecting to pay the foreign currency. So because it's the opposite, I'm going to enter into an opposite forward position. Okay. So here the answer is a long forward. Okay. So if I were to enter into a long forward position, what is my future dollar obligation to settle this payment? So here I'm looking at my obligation in USD if I hedge. Okay. So as we mentioned before, with the hedge position, your USD proceeds or obligations will stay the same regardless of how the future looks like. Okay. So in this case, what is my US cost? My US dollar cost. For this calculation, I do not need to look at the future the future spot exchange rate. Okay. So here, if I want to find the US dollar cost to settle this transaction using a forward contract, so if I long the forward contract as of today, then my US cost would be 10 million euro. I mean 100 million euro times the forward rate. Okay, so that will give me the US dollar cost to settle this contract under the forward contract. Okay. So bear that in mind first before we move on to the next slide. Okay. So once again, I'm going to do the same analysis as before. I'm going to list out the steps involved in each of the positions. So with the hedge position, I'm going to enter into a forward contract today for a delivery of 1 year. Okay. So as we mentioned before, we want to long a forward. Okay. In this position. So in 1 year's time, with a hedge position, I'm going to have to deliver, I'm going to have to pay. This should be the euro, sorry. So in 1 year's time, I'm going to have to pay the euro to my trade partner in Italy. So in 1 year's time, I'm going to the spot market and I'm going to buy 100 million euros, okay? So I'm going to buy 100 million euros in the market at the end of 1 year. Okay. With the unhedged position, I'm going to do the same thing as well in step 1, which is to convert the USD into 100 million euro. Now, with the hedge position, besides converting the USD into 100 million euros, I will also have to settle the forward contract, okay, using net settlement, which means that I'm going to settle the difference. I'm just going to write here. The difference between the future spot rate and the forward rate, okay? Does that make sense? In the unhedged position, of course, I have no forward position to settle. Okay. So let's look at the first scenario when our spot exchange rate is lower than the forward rate, okay? So in this case, my spot exchange rate in the future is 1.09, okay? So in the future, when I go to the spot exchange market and I want to buy 100 million euros, I'm going to pay 1.09 USD for each euro, okay? So with my unhedged position, I'm going to look at it first. So as we mentioned before, at time 0, we are going to do nothing here. At time 1, when the time comes when I have to pay to my Italian supplier, I'm going to go to the exchange rate, to the exchange market, and I'm going to convert my USD into 100 million euro. Okay. So at that time, if I want to buy 100 million euro, I'm going to have to pay 1.9 USD per euro. Okay. So that overall, I'm going to have to pay 109 million USD. Okay. So with the unhedged position, that is it. That's all I have to do. I just have to wait for 1 year, and then I'm going to convert the USD to the euro later on. With the hedge position, at time 0, I'm going to enter into a long forward position to buy the euro at the prevailing forward rate of 1.25, and this is to be settled in 1 year. Okay. So in 1 year's time, when the time comes when I need to pay to my European supplier, I'm going to go to the spot market and buy 100 million euro. I'm going to pay the same amount of money as this guy, so $109 million. But because I have entered into a forward contract at time 0, I'm going to have the second position. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to settle my forward contract using net settlement, which means I'm just going to transfer the net amount between ST and F to my counterparty. Okay. So in this case, my payoff function for a long forward is ST minus F. And because ST is less than F, that means I will have to pay to the counterparty. Okay. So how much do I pay? I will pay the difference between the current spot rate, the future spot rate, and the forward rate, times the notional amount of 100 million euro. Okay. So that will be 16 million USD. So for my hedge position, my overall USD dollar cost is the sum of step 1 and step 2. So 109 plus 16, that will be 125 million USD. Okay. So in other words, if I have entered into a long forward position at the start, I am going to have to pay 125 million USD in 1 year's time. So where does this number come from? It is once again the notional amount times the forward rate. Okay. So in this case, when I have a long forward contract, and if the market rate is lower than the forward rate, I'm actually worse off relative to everyone else in the market because I need to pay a bit more. Okay. In contrast, let's look at a situation where the future spot rate is higher than the forward rate. So in this case, my future spot rate is 1.35. With the unhedged position, once again, I'm just going to wait into the future, and I'm going to convert. I'm going to buy the euro at the future spot rate. Okay. So at the future spot rate of 1.35, I'm going to have to pay $135 million to buy 100 million euro. Okay. With the hedge position at time 0, exactly the same as before, I have entered into a long forward position. At time t equals to 1, this is when I have to pay my supplier. I'm going to buy 100 million euro in the spot exchange market, and I'm going to pay the same amount as this guy here. But I'm going to have an additional position in the forward contract. And in this case, it should be a positive number. So in the second position with the forward contract, because the spot rate is higher than the forward rate, I'm going to receive money from my partner, okay, so from my counterparty. So under the forward contract, I'm going to receive 10 million, 100 million euro times the difference between the spot and the forward rate. So I'm going to receive 10 million USD in this case, okay? So overall, with my hedge position, my total dollar cost in this case is 125 million, okay? Which is exactly the same as before, and which is exactly the same as 100 million euro times the forward rate, okay? So in the second case, when the future spot rate is higher than the forward rate, I'm actually better off relative to an unhedged position because I pay a little bit less, okay? So once again, if I want to draw the payout function for the hedged and the unhedged position here. Now this is an account payable. So with the unhedged position, it looks like this, okay? So the higher the spot exchange rate, the more the dollar cost that you have to pay. For the hedge position, it will be a flat line, okay? So with the hedge position, doesn't matter what the market looks like in the future, you're going to always be paying 125 million USD, okay? Any questions so far? So this is a topic that will go into your midterm. So make sure that you understand what we are doing here and make sure you understand why when we enter into a forward contract, we basically eliminate exchange rate risk movement, okay, from our position, okay? Okay. Now, did we want to take a short break of 5 minutes? Let's take a short break of 5 minutes, and when we come back, we will go through the options in the money market hedge, okay? And that will be it for our lecture today. So let's take a 5 minutes break, guys. And when we come back, we will talk about money market hedge and options, okay? Okay, so are we ready to come back? Now, as we mentioned before, for this lecture today, I'm going to just go through the money market hedge and also the options hedge, and we'll finish for today. For the rest of the lecture, we'll cover it in the next week, okay? In next week's lecture. So for now, let's talk about money market hedge. So with money market hedge, the idea is similar to a covered interest arbitrage. And the idea here is what if there is no forward market for us to hedge, right? So what if there's no forward market for us to enter into? We can't find any counterparty that provide a forward contract for us, right? So in that case, we can get around that problem using money market hedge. So here, let me write here, there's no forward involved with money market hedge. So in this case, you can use money market instruments to also hedge your exchange rate risk exposure here. Okay, so without the use of forward contracts, you can still hedge your current exchange foreign exchange rate risk exposure using money market instruments. Okay, so when we talk about money market instruments, we are talking about interest-bearing instruments, okay? So something like notes or bank deposits, so on and so on, so forth, okay? So as a result, somehow we need to involve the interest rates here, okay? So for money market hedge, if I have a foreign currency payable, so in this case, I'm expecting to pay someone in the future, okay? So if I need to pay someone in the foreign currency in the future, essentially what I can do is I can go to the foreign exchange rate market in the future, buy that foreign currency, and then deliver that to my trade partner, okay? So with a foreign currency payable, The step that we need to do with money market hedge is to first borrow the present value of the foreign currency payable today in domestic currency. We then convert that domestic currency to the foreign currency, and we are going to invest that foreign currency in the foreign market, okay, at the foreign market, right? At maturity, we are going to use the proceeds from the foreign investment to pay the foreign currency payable, and we are going to repay the domestic currency loan, okay? So the amount that we repay our domestic currency loan is our domestic currency obligations for this account payable, okay? So to explain to you why we follow these steps, I'm going to share with you my notes. Okay, so this is my note, okay? Now, as we mentioned before, I just found a typo here, so I'm just gonna correct that typo first. Going to pay before we do anything else. Okay. So suppose I've got two currencies. Suppose I've got the USD and the Euro, okay? And in this case, I'm a US citizen. So the foreign currency here for me is the Euro, okay? So if this is an account payable, that means in the future, I'm expecting to pay the foreign currency. So I'm going to pay the Euro to my counterparty, okay? So in the future, I need to be able to convert my USD to the Euro and use that Euro to pay to my counterparty, to my counterparty. So the problem here for me is I want to fix this US obligation, okay? So somehow I want to fix the amount of USD that I'm going to have to pay for this account payable, okay? So suppose in this case, I've got a account payable of 1 million euro to pay, okay? So in the future, I know that in, say, next year, I need to pay €1 million to my counterparty, right? So I know for sure that in the future, I'm going to need to pay €1 million. And I know also that I can't use the forward contract to lock in this obligation. So I'm going to have to go through the money market, okay? So how do I know which money market instruments to use? So as we mentioned before, in the future, we want to have €1 million ready on our hand so that we can deliver to our counterparty, okay? So I know for sure that in the future, in 1 year's time, I need €1 million sitting in my bank account to settle this transaction, okay? So to have €1 million in the future, one way I can have that is that at the current time, at time zero, I can invest in Europe, in a money market in the Europe, so that in the future, my investment will yield €1 million, okay? So to be able to do that, I need to invest the present value of €1 million as of today in the Europe, okay? So to have this present value of €1 million to invest at time zero, I'm going to need to convert my USD into the Euro as of today first, okay? So I'm just working backwards, okay? So from here to here, I know that I have to convert the USD to the Euro, okay? So to make this Euro investment, I need to be able to pay for that investment first off. So where do I get my USD from? Where do I get my USD from for this investment? I'm going to have to borrow the USD in the US, okay? So if I borrow the USD here at time zero, I'm going to borrow it for a maturity of 1 year, so that in 1 year's time, I'm going to have to pay back my loan, okay? So how much do I have to pay? I'm going to have to pay back the future value of whatever I borrow as of the current time, Okay. Does that make sense? So this is how money market hedge works. So you don't have any forward contract, but you're going to use money market instruments to basically lock in your USD obligation as of today. Okay. So once again, we start from what we know. We start from our known obligation in the future, which is 1 million euro. We're working backwards. So to have 1 million euro for the future, I'm going to need to invest the present value of it as of today. So where do I get the money to invest? I'm going to have to borrow in the US and convert it into the euro, okay, at the current spot rate. So if I borrow in the US, I'm going to have to pay back in the future, the future value of it, okay? So the amount that I pay back here is in the USD, and this will be the effective USD cost to settle this 1 million euro payment, okay? So through this strategy, I can see that the only time when I'm exposed to exchange rate risk is here at time 0, when I exchange the USD for the euro, okay? And because I'm exchanging the currency as of today, the exchange rate that I use is known to me, which is the current spot rate. In the future, in 1 year's time, I am not exposed to any exchange rate risk here, right? Because I'm not dealing with the exchange, the foreign exchange market anymore. I'm dealing with the money markets here, okay? So in the future, I have no exchange rate risk exposure. I only have one loan in the US and one investment in the euro, okay? So no exchange rate risk here. So the US dollar cost for my payment is effectively the amount I have to pay back for the US loan, okay? So with a foreign currency receivable, we're gonna do the same sort of similar steps. So in this case, once again, we don't have the forward contract, and we're going to use money market instruments to hedge our position, okay? So in this case, I'm going to borrow the present value of the foreign currency receivable today. I'm going to convert that amount into the domestic currency at the current spot rate. So here, the only time when I deal with the foreign exchange market is in the spot market today, okay? I'm going to invest that at the domestic rate, and I'm going to use the foreign currency receivable to pay the loan, okay? So at maturity, I'm going to collect the proceeds from the domestic investment, and this will be the guaranteed domestic currency proceeds from the sale, okay, from the account receivable. So essentially what we did was we did exactly the same as before, but we reversed the arrow, okay? So we lend, in this case, we lend in our domestic country and we borrow in the foreign country, okay? So let's look at one example to hopefully make it clearer. So in this case, I've got an exporter, right? So I'm a US company, Boeing Corporation, and I exported a Boeing 707 to British Airways, and I bill 10 million pounds, okay? This is payable in 1 year. That means in 1 year's time, I'm going to get 10 million pounds from my trade partner, okay? So we've got the same information as before. We've got the spot exchange rate. We've got the forward exchange rate. We've got the US and the UK interest rates, okay? For this question, I'm going to use money market hedge, so I don't have to worry too much about the forward rate here. What I need to worry about is the interest rates in the two relevant countries, okay? So I'm going to go back to the previous slide so that you can see the steps for a foreign currency receivable. if you have not got this ready with you, make sure you write it down or you take a picture of it. So in the next 1 minute or so, I want you to spend time and try to follow the steps on the previous slide and try to construct a money market hedge for this case, okay? So in 1 or 2 minutes, we are going to go back and discuss the answer for this problem, okay? Okay, so let's go through the steps, okay? So normally it's easier for me to work with the graph or some like pictures or timeline. So I need to visualize things to work. But if you want to follow the steps, if you want to remember the steps as in the slide, it's okay as well. And we are going to work through the steps in the slide, okay? What I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna incorporate these steps in this picture here. So if you are like me, if you need a picture to visualize things, then you can also do that, okay? So step 1, with an account receivable, I'm going to borrow the present value of the foreign currency receivable as of today, okay? So the amount of currency receivable here is 10 million pounds, okay? So can someone therefore tell me how much do I need to borrow today? So first of all, am I borrowing from the US or am I borrowing from the UK? I've got 1 person, 2 people answering UK, 3 people answering UK. 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, you guys are on the right track. 9.17 million pounds. So Kang said it should be 9.17 million pounds. Yes, spot on, Kang. So you guys are spot on. So we are all on the right track here. We need to borrow from the UK, right? And how much do we borrow? We borrow the present value of 10 million pounds, okay? I'm just going to write it here. I'm going to borrow UK. So the present value of this 10 million pound is 10 million divided by, what's the interest rate here? 1.09, okay? So overall, I got about 9,174,312 pounds, okay? So for this money market hedge, my first step is I'm going to borrow from the UK the present value of 10 million pounds, okay? So after I have borrowed that much, what do I need to do? I'm going to need to convert that amount into the domestic currency at the current spot rate, okay? So I'm going to convert the pounds. I'm going to convert the pounds into the USD at the current spot rate, which is $1.5 per pound, okay? So how much USD do I get when I convert the pounds into the USD? Yep, I've got an answer here. Just give me a second. So Kang again. So 13 million.7, spot on, Kang. So I've got the same answer as you as well. So if I'm going to take 9.1 something million pounds and I'm going to times 1.5, I'm going to get a value of 13,796 464 USD, okay? So this is how much USD I'm going to get if I convert 9.1 million pounds into the dollar at the current spot rate, okay? Step 3, I'm going to invest at the domestic rate. So I'm going to take all of the USD I've got, I'm going to invest in the US for 1 year, so that in the future I'm going to receive the future value of that, right, at the US exchange rate. So here I'm going to write lend US. Okay. So that's my step 1, that's my step 2, and that's my step 3. Okay. So I'm going to take 13 something million USD, and I'm going to times it with 1 plus the interest rate in the US. Okay. This is a 1 year investment, so I'm not going to do any power. Now, what do I get here? 14,697,000. Yep. I've got something close to that as well. So I'm going to get 14,600,918 USD. Okay. So in 1 year's time, what happens is the counterparty is going to pay me 10 million pounds, and I'm going to use that payment. So in the future, British Airways is going to pay me 10 million pounds. Okay. So when I get this payment from British Airways, I'm going to use that to pay my loan obligation here, right? So remember, at the first step, we borrow the present value of 10 million pounds. So in the future, we are going to need to pay back 10 million pounds, okay? So where do we get the money from? It will come from British Airways, okay? So in the future, I'm going to have zero exposure to my pounds position, because I have net off these 2 positions. And what I am left with is the USD proceeds of 14.6 million USD. Okay. So effectively, through this money market hedge, I have locked in my US proceeds at 14.6 million USD. Okay. So through these transactions, you can see that we have not get any exposure to foreign exchange rate risk in the future. Okay, the only time when we have to deal with currency conversion is at the current time when we convert the pounds into the USD. Okay, so besides that, we have no exposure to foreign exchange rate. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. So as we mentioned before, this is the final USD proceeds from our account receivable. Okay. So in terms of cash flow summary, this is just what we did before. So here we borrow the pounds. We borrow the present value of 10 million pounds. We're going to convert the pounds into the dollar. So we're going to acquire about 13.7 million USD. And in exchange, we pay them the pounds. Okay. Then we invest in the United States. And because we invest, we've got to pay at time 0. Okay. So the net cash flow for us at time 0 is nothing. In the future, when the loans mature, we are going to pay back our loans 10 million pounds using the money that we receive from British Airways. And what is left is the US proceeds here, 14.6 million USD. Okay. So if we compare this number to the previous number, so we did this question before in a previous slide when we talk about forward hedge. We will see that this is exactly the same as the outcome from a forward hedge. Okay. So when your forward hedge gives you the same outcome as the money market hedge, that is when your interest rate parity holds. Okay, so in this case, when you check the IRP, it should hold. Okay. So any questions so far with the money market hedge? If not, I'm going to move on to options, okay? So with options, we have had like a mini sort of introduction to options before with lecture 4, I guess. And also I've got a summary notes on options. So in this lecture, we are going to talk about option hedge in a bit more details, okay? So as we mentioned before, with a hedging strategy using options, most of the time we are looking at long options, okay? So we'll be buying the option instead of selling it, okay? So we are the holders of the option in this case if we want to hedge. So with option contracts, it gives the holder the right to buy or sell an asset at an agreed price in the future. So call options are options that allow us to buy, and put options are options that allow us to sell. Okay, so depending on whether you have an account receivable or account payable, you need to use either a call or a put option. Okay, so options provide a flexible hedge against exchange rate risk exposure, right? So we talked about this before. With forwards or futures, your payoff function is a straight line, okay? So it doesn't matter what happens to the market in the future. If you enter into a forward agreement, you would always have to honor your contract. With options, you pay a premium at the start, but in exchange, you get to choose when to exercise or whether to exercise the option or not, okay? So with an account payable, the firm would like to protect itself only if the foreign currency strengthens, right? So if you need to pay the foreign currency in the future, you don't want it to be expensive, okay? So in this case, you want to be protected against a future appreciation of the foreign currency. But at the same time, you want to be open to the possibility that the foreign currency is going to depreciate in the future, okay? So you do not want to lock yourself in a forward contract. So when you have an account payable and you want to protect yourself against appreciation in foreign currency, you want to enter into a call option, right? So with a call option, this is your option payoff, yeah? So when the foreign currency appreciates, when SD increases, right? So SD is the value of the foreign currency. When it increases, you exercise the option and you get the protection here. But when SD decreases, when the currency depreciates, you want to have an option to trade the currency at a cheaper rate, okay? So in this case, you want to leave the downside open so that you can take advantage of a depreciation, okay? Now, in the opposite case, if I have a foreign currency receivable, so I expect to receive the foreign currency, so I expect to receive the pounds, for example, in 3 months' time, what do I want to be protected against, okay? So in this case, do I want to be protected against a currency appreciation or a currency depreciation? Okay, tell me. So with an account receivable, do I want to be protected against foreign currency appreciation or depreciation? Depreciation, I've got an answer here. I've got appreciation, depreciation. So I've got 5 answers here. What about the other people? I've got 6. What about the other guys? What do we think? I've got 9 answers. I've got 10 answers now. I need the other guys to participate, okay? So overall, I've got a majority of people answering depreciate, and I've got some people answering appreciate, okay? So the answer here is the opposite to what we just talked about before with account payable. So in this case, if I'm going to receive the foreign currency, I want to be protected against the case when the foreign currency depreciates, right? I'm going to receive an asset and I don't want the asset to depreciate in value, okay? So here the downside risk for me is the foreign currency is going to depreciate, and in which case I want some protection, okay? At the same time, I want to leave the market open. I want to leave my position open to benefit from the currency appreciating, okay? So in this case, it's the opposite to the previous case. So if that's the case, what do I do now? I'm going to start the poll again, and you need to tell me the answer. Okay. So in this case, if this is what I want to do, what am I going to do with the option contract? Number 1, do I want to short the call? Number 2, do I want to buy a put? Number 3, do I want to short the put? Okay. So in this case, if I want to protect myself from this position, I will be buying an option, okay? So I'm not going to be selling an option, because when I sell, I basically allow people to exercise the option against me. So no, I'm not going to sell an option, okay? So sell is out of the question. What I want to do is I want to buy a put, okay? So I'm going to buy a put. So only when you buy an option do you have a insurance contract, right? An insurance-like contract. If you sell an option, that is when you sell the insurance, okay? So you are there getting ready for people to exercise against you. You don't have the option, okay? So as a result, here I want to buy a put. So why do I want to buy a put? That's because I get protected for any downside risk, okay? So when the future spot rate is very low, I get this protection here. But alternatively, when the spot rate is high, I leave myself open to take advantage of that position, okay? To take advantage of a currency appreciation, okay? Okay. So just to summarize, with the call option, I have protection on the upside. So when the spot exchange rate increases, I can exercise the option, and in this case, I will get protected. Okay. On the downside, I leave myself open so that I can take advantage of a currency depreciation. Okay. On the put option is the opposite. Okay. And this is to protect you from a downside movement. Okay, so let's look at an example. So in this case, we've got the same exact company as before, and we have the same exact account receivable as before, okay? So we've got Boeing selling an aircraft to British Airways, and they are going to charge £10 million for that aircraft, okay? This is going to be payable in 1 year's time. And for Boeing as the exporter, this is an account receivable for them, okay? Oopsie. Anyway, so In this case, if I want to protect myself for an account receivable, I'm going to buy a put, okay, as we talked about before. I'm going to be buying the put. Suppose that the exercise price for the option is $1.46 per pound, and this is for a 1-year expiration, okay? Now, with options, if we buy an option, we need to pay a premium. So with this option, the premium is $0.02 per pound, and this is paid upfront, okay? So with an option, premium is similar to any insurance contract. You need to pay the premium at the start of the month when you sign the contract, okay? So how much in dollar cost is the option premium? It will be the premium per pound times the notional amount, which is 10 million pound. So that will be 200,000 USD. Okay. So to enter into this put option, you need to pay the bank 2,100 USD at the start. Okay. This option allows you to sell the pounds at 1.46 in the future if you choose to. Okay. So just to recall from what we talked about in the previous week, if I want to compute the payoff function for a put option, it will be E for exercise price minus ST and 0, okay, minus the put option premium. So the payoff function for my put option would be the max between E minus ST, 0, and then minus the premium, okay. So in this question, we are asked what would Boeing do if in 1 year's time? Number one, the future market rate is greater than 1.46. And number two, the future market rate is less than 1.46. Okay. So think about this for a moment and tell me what Boeing would do. Okay. So in this case, Boeing has an account receivable, and they enter into a option contract, a put option contract with a strike price of 1.46. Okay. Sorry. I have posted a question for you guys. So think about the question and tell me what is the answer. Okay. So here I've got the spot exchange rate smaller than the exercise price. Okay. So pay attention to the sign here. So in this case, the future spot exchange rate is less than the exercise price. So I'm looking at this situation here. So in this case, I'm looking at this situation here. Let me see if I have a graph ready, or do I have to draw it again? Now, what about the other guys? Do we have any thoughts, any suggestions? I did not have a draft, so I'm gonna just draw it here. So this is my exercise price, 1.46. And what do I have here? I've got a put option, okay? So I'm just going to be very okay, so this is my put option. So when when the future spot rate is less than 1.46, right? So this is when my ST is less than E, 1.46. In this case, do I want to exercise my option? I'm going to relaunch the poll again, and I want you to think about the question in light of the graph here. Okay. So here I'm looking at the left-hand side of the graph, and this is my call. I mean, this is my put payoff function. Okay. I've got one answer, which is to exercise. I've got 3 answers, which is to exercise. All right. Okay, so it looks like we are on the right track now. So in this case, if the spot rate is less than the exercise price, that means if I sell the pounds in the market, I'm going to be selling at a lower rate. Whereas if I sell under the put option, I'm going to be selling at 1.46, which is a higher rate. Okay, so in this case, it's better for me to exercise the option. Okay, so if I am Boeing and if I have an option in place, I'm going to exercise when the spot rate is lower than my strike price, 1.46. And in the opposite situation, when the future spot rate is greater than my exercise price, I'm not going to exercise my option. Okay. And why is that the case? That's because I can sell the pounds in the spot market at a higher rate than 1.46. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to the market, and I just forget about my put option. Okay. So one more thing we haven't talked about. So in either case, doesn't matter if the market goes up or down, I'm going to have to pay my premium regardless. So regardless of what happens in the future, I'm going to pay 200,000 US dollars as of today to buy the option. Okay, so the future value of that is 212,200 US dollars, and this will be taken into account in our overall payoff. Okay, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So on this slide, I've got my exchange rates. Okay, so these are my exchange rates in the future, going from low to high. And here I've got my exercise decision for the put option. Okay, so as we mentioned before, we want to compare the actual spot rate in the future with the strike price of 1.46. So when the spot rate is lower than 1.46, it's good for me to exercise the option, in which case I'm going to exercise. Okay. When the spot rate is greater than 1.46, it doesn't make sense for me to sell under the put option. I can go to the market, I can go to the spot market and sell at a higher rate instead. Okay, so in this case, I'm not going to exercise my option. Okay, so if I exercise my option, I'm going to be selling the pounds. So I'm going to be selling 10 million pounds at the option exercise price, which is 1.46. So whenever I decide to exercise my option, my dollar proceeds will be the same, okay, which is 14.6 million. So if I exercise, then this will be the same, okay. In the neutral case, exercise or not will have the same outcome. So I'm going to get 14.6 million. Now, in the case when I don't exercise my option, I'm going to go to the spot market and I'm going to sell the pounds in the spot market instead. Okay. So in this case, how much do I get in terms of the dollar? I'm going to take 10 million pounds. I'm going to times it by the spot market rate. So in this case, it's 1.5. So I'll get 15 million USD, and so on and so forth. Okay. So these are just the gross dollar proceeds from an option hedge. Besides the gross dollar proceeds, I need to take into account the option cost as well. Okay. So I have to pay the option premium as of today. So 200,000 USD, as we mentioned before, which means that at the time when I exercise the option, at the time when I have to settle the PAL account receivable, which is in 1 year's time, this will become, this cash flow will become 212,200 US dollars. Okay, so to compute the net cost for an option hedge strategy, I'm going to minus my overall proceeds with the option cost, okay, as of time 1. And so my net dollar proceeds is given here. Okay. So this is the net proceeds, which is the gross proceeds minus the option cost. So as you can see, using option hedging, you are potentially protected on the downside. So it doesn't matter how low the exchange rate moves, your lowest dollar proceeds is 14.3 something million USD. But on the upside, if the exchange rate moves up in your favor, then your proceeds will be higher. Okay, so you got protected on the downside, but you're not limited on the upside. Okay. So any questions so far? I think we are coming to the end of the lecture, and because we still have some time, I want to make sure that everyone understand these financial hedge. Okay. All right. So as usual, if you have any questions, just yell out. Okay. So finally, for today, we're going to talk about comparing different types of hedging. So in this case, this is what we showed before with the forward hedge. Okay. So with the forward hedge, it's going to be a flat line. Doesn't matter what happens to the market. In the future, you're going to get the same payoff, which is 14.6 million USD. With the option hedge, the minimum proceeds that you are going to get is 14.3 something million. This is because it's costly for you to buy an option, okay? So when you buy an option, you need to pay an option premium, and therefore your proceeds is a little bit less. But at the same time, because of the potential upside gain, for an option hedge, you are not limited on your upside gain, okay? So you're protected on the downside, but you're not limited on the upside. So here at this point here, this is the rate at which your forward hedge and your option hedge would yield the same outcome. And how do you find that rate? Now we know that the forward hedge will return the same proceeds regardless. So that will be 14.6 million USD. Your option hedge outcome would be this much, okay? This is because we're looking at the, so here, I'm just going to use the pen again. So here at this point in time, this is a point towards the right side, okay? So this is when you exercise your option. So on this side of the graph, the option hedge position, this is the hedge position, okay? That means it includes both your put option and your underlying asset. So on the right-hand side of the graph, your option hedge position is given by this formula here. So this is 10 million pounds times ST, right? So it's an upward sloping line, and it increases with your spot exchange rate, okay? Minus the option cost, which is $212,200, okay? So on the right-hand side, your option hedge payoff function is given by this. So if you want to find the rate at which your forward hedge is equal to your option hedge, you just have to equate your forward payoff with the option payoff, okay? And you will find that at the rate of 1.48, your option hedge will yield the same outcome as your forward hedge, okay? All right, so to summarize the three different financial hedging strategies that we talk about in today's class. So we talked about forward market hedge, okay? So this was just a revision for you guys. We talk about money market hedge, and we talk about options market hedge, okay? So in this example, we look at Boeing that have a 10 million pounds account receivable in the future, okay? So on this slide, I list out all the actions that we need to do for each of the hedging strategies. And here we've got the outcomes, okay? So with forward market hedge and money market hedge, these are obligations, which means that you basically lock in your contract, and regardless of what happens, you are going to honor your contract, okay? With forward market hedge and money market hedge, you basically get a flat line, okay? So in these two strategies, all of the exchange rate risk exposure has been eliminated, and therefore your outcome would always be the same, regardless of how the future moves. With the option market hedge, it's a little bit different. So you get protected on the downside, but at the same time, your upside is not limited, okay? But because of this flexibility, you've got to pay a premium at the start, okay? So our last question is, should a firm hedge, okay? So this is one of the questions that you need to answer in your assignment as well. And this requires a bit of a big picture sort of discussion here, okay? So although it looks like it's a straightforward question, so when a firm hedge is obviously safer for the firm because they can eliminate exchange rate risk, but in practice, not everyone agrees that hedging is optimal for a firm, okay? So not everyone agrees that hedging is always value enhancing. Now, first of all, in terms of theory, if we assume that everyone is rational and if you assume that the market is very, very efficient, then the firm should not do the hedging. The firm should not make the decision to hedge. It should be the shareholders who need to hedge themselves, okay? Why is that the case? That's because a firm could have many different shareholders and they all have different risk appetite, okay? So we might have a very risk averse person on the board. We could have a very, very risk-seeking person on the board, okay? So if we hedge, then we assume that every shareholder is the same, which is not the case. So maybe it's more efficient if we leave the shareholder to hedge if they want to, okay? Also, this point here argues about the benefit of hedging. So with hedging, we can reduce the non-diversifiable risk of the firm, right? So we can remove some of the movements in the exchange rate, but we can never remove any that fundamental or systematic risk, okay? So if a shareholder has a diversified portfolio, then this hedging decision becomes redundant because by definition, with a diversified portfolio, they are already, all of the non-diversifiable risks has already been taken care of, okay? So this is a bit costly, but there's no additional benefit from this point of view. Now, on the other hand, people argue that sometimes it's better for the firm to hedge rather than leaving it to the market or to the shareholders, because sometimes it's cheaper for the firm to do so, okay? So for example, in the presence of market imperfections, maybe it's cheaper for the firm to hedge relative to the shareholders, okay? So one example I can think of is the economy of scales. When a firm buys a forward contract they can do that on a wholesale level. Whereas for individual investors, if I have to go to the forward market to hedge my foreign exchange rate risk of, say, a £2,000 position, the bank is not going to sell me that contract. Okay, they require a larger contract size. So in some cases, when we talk about real markets, then sometimes it makes sense for the firm to hedge rather than leaving it to the shareholders. Okay. So that was the final discussion that I wanted to talk to you about today with financial hedge. So when we go back next week with the lecture, we are going to talk about economic exposure and operating exposure. Okay. So do we have any other questions or comments before we conclude? So as I mentioned before, the first part of this topic, which is forward hedge, will be in your midterm. So make sure you revise it well. Okay. Thanks, Leah. Any final questions about the midterm? Thanks, Tom. So I have I'm going to provide 2 extra consultation hours on Monday, May 11th, 2 days before your midterm. So if you have any last minute questions, feel free to pop in during my consultation time on Monday, May 11th, and I'm happy to answer all the questions. Okay. So it is now 2 weeks before your midterm, so it's a good time for you to think about revision. Okay. So if there is no other questions, I'm going to conclude the class. Thanks guys for joining in today, and I'll see you next week. Okay.